Okay, I changed to English because that would be the language that we will talk. I will be used to talk. I'm very happy to have today to have Olaf and Bibiana to do this incredible performance. The first time I saw this performance was in April in Athens for the Documenta. It was really impressive. So at the moment I saw the performance, I decided we should have Olaf to do it again in the MAXXI. I think this is really one of the latest work by Olaf, of course. He has been really active since, let's say, the early 90s in Berlin and in the world all around, and we have been collaborating on different projects, on public art projects, biennials, and of course, Olaf lately, for the last few years, has been really developing a lot of performance work, from opera to reading to today we see the sound, improvisation, and that they all have very strong conceptual kind of power. In the meantime, it's very directly related to the question of city, public space, agitation, resistance, and of course, chaos. Being someone like Olaf, who have been living through a really important historical change, coming from the eastern part of Germany. I guess Olaf and his brother, Carsten, who's also a very outstanding electronic artist. They grew up in the eastern part of Germany, and then when the Berlin Wall fell, I think they moved to Berlin and really started a really new kind of artistic career. But in the meantime, I think this transition has marked a very important substance in his work. So before I put it to Anne for the further conversation, I just want to ask one question to Olaf. How much this transition has marked your way of thinking, your way of creating art, and what is this work related somehow to this experience?
Thank you, Wanru, for the introduction, also for the kind invitation to present the piece here. It's very difficult to reflect on yourself and to make a judgment what you are doing, because this is a very personal perspective and it's mostly not fitting into the perspective what other people have. But when you would have asked me this question in the 90s, I would immediately ignore it and said, no, there's no evidence of that. But now, after more than 20 years, I would say there is a strong evidence. But for this piece, for sure, because I was participating in the demonstrations in '89 in Leipzig. So the feeling being part of a crowd of people in a demonstration, not knowing what's going to happen, is a feeling which, since this time, is somehow encapsulated in me. I mean, I know this feeling. And sometimes it comes up and you feel again these moments. And that was also something what I was very interested in when I was thinking about this piece. So that is something that has for sure something. I was spending some time in Hungary before I went back to East Germany, which was in the beginning of '89, and there were a lot of these demonstrations already going on. And there was, not at least in Georgia in April, in Tbilisi, this incredible demonstration where a lot of people were killed, and not to forget Beijing, Tiananmen. So there was a period where these things were very part of the life what you were in, and which was not a news from far away. It was a news which had directly an impact on you, because it could happen there where you are right now with you as well. And you had to make a choice, you had to make a decision.
Allora, io parlerò in italiano. E il progetto che abbiamo visto, dunque hai lavorato con questi suoni presi dalla radio, questo archivio sonoro della radio, e mi è venuto in mente il progetto che avevi presentato a Venezia, Non consumiamo, in cui prendevi ispirazione dal lavoro di Luigi Nono, che aveva registrato anche lui i suoni delle manifestazioni nel 68 alla Biennale. Volevo dunque chiederti se esiste una relazione tra questi due lavori e anche che cosa ti ha spinto a presentarlo, a presentare questo lavoro, a produrre questo lavoro per Documenta ad Atene.
So maybe to say first why the document was related to this work. This Documenta had the idea also to host a radio channel and to support radio as a mean of distribution. So they were collaborating with 8 radio stations worldwide, and they invited artists and commissioned especially pieces for these radios. And when they asked me if I would like to do something, I was very interested if I not only to use the radio as a transmitter, also to use the radio as a source, as a material. So I was asking if they can maybe give me recordings, what the reporters are doing while they're going to the street and when they report about a demonstration or a riot. So they have this so-called atmos, you know, the background things. And so I was contacting these people from these radio stations and worldwide other radios, and then we had a research done, and we got like 4 hours of material from very, very different places in the world and for very, very different occasions. And from that I use samples, but I did not transform any of them. So everything what you heard is like an original sound. What I did only is I was looping some of them, and some of them I would put on different layers of the channels so that they're overlaying. But there's nothing which is in certain ways manipulated or is electronically transformed. And this piece was then broadcasted in the radio. And I had from the beginning the idea that the piece can be something more than just that you listen to it in a radio, that you also could use it for performances, and you can adapt it in different constellations, that you can do it like we did it today with somebody who is improvising to it, and on the other side also it's open for other possibilities, dance, like staging of objects or whatever. So I'm very interested in how this sound can be also adapted for other reasons. And the piece by Luigi Nono, Non consumiamo MAXXI, is something what he did in '68 when he was invited for the Venice Biennial. And when I got the invitation in 2015 to the Venice Biennial by Ogui and Vesor, he was centering the Biennial around a reading of the Kapital by Karl Marx. So, and I found it very interesting that in '68 the artists were refusing to participate in the Biennial, and in 2015 the Biennial is staging in the center that what was the core idea for revolution. So it looks like a totally upside down. And this constellation I was trying to use. So, and I worked there as well with improvisation and especially with texts. So I was writing a libretto, a kind of opera, and so we performed over 7 months different kind of songs in the arena, and people could also use backpacks where there are speakers in, and they could really choose radio channels live and to mix with the songs which were part of the opera. So you yourself could compose, and walking around through the exhibition, a kind of sound. And that was, of course, already this kind of cacophony, what you have, this kind of sound which is between something what people would call music and other people would call no-go. So I'm interested in especially when a sound is starting to keep you busy. I mean, what is a sound? And no idea with non consumiamo Marx was also a democratic idea for music. So he used the tape because the tape is not an orchestra. You don't need an orchestra to stage the thing. You don't have to, for the performance, it's very easy. He had some voices and very elaborate and very great singers. But that was also at that time his idea that you can bring it easily somewhere. And I found that also it's the interesting challenge for today, that you have just a little bag where you come somewhere and then you can do something. And that is also part of that.
How do you actually work with the musicians? How much, this interaction between you being the one who conceptualized the project and the musician who kind of reinterpreted with improvisation? Of course, it's not only this work, and also there are a few other works that you work with singers, for example, and so on. And how this relation is built? How do you every time, generate perhaps a new meaning?
It's very, very different from project to project. For example, the first project I did was in Munich in the museum Pinakothek, Escalier du Chant. So every Sunday, last Sunday of a month, there were some singers in the museum, but they were like ordinary visitors of the museum. And at a certain point, they started to sing. But what they were singing were compositions which I commissioned by 12 composers. And I asked the composers if they could compose a song for voices, a cappella, which is related to the actual news. So news songs. But I let them up what they think what is a news, which is important to talk about, and also how they deal with the news. So you had to reach from songs which were like in the Eisler Brechtchen style to totally abstract songs, which are just layers of sound. And then when it happened, people were not knowing what's going on. But over the year, there was an audience created, so that the whole museum was transformed into a kind of concert hall, and so people were waiting for these kind of things. So but it was in this case also a question: what is the relation between sound and information? I mean, what can you really transform? And then the project what we were talking about in Venice. With the singers, I had 3 workshops where we elaborated in the workshops formulas of kind of sound, what they should perform like. So we were studying no, and we were seeing what kind of little samples of no are very characteristic for his playing with the voice. And from that we had a set of vocabulary what should be used. So it was like creating some cards for the play. And for this here now, it's for me very important that the person who is improvising towards it is extremely free in the reaction to it. Because the flow to get into it and to react to that, it is very interesting to see how you behave as a single person to a sound which is created by a mass. So there's also this idea that you as a singularity, when you are surrounded by things, how you interact, if you join a mass or if you resist a mass, or how you find your position in the mass. Is there any position? And so this is, so from each project it varies very much how you deal with it. And there's one project where I also just wrote notations, very clear, but notations more in a sense that there's also a part of playful improvisation in it. I'm very interested in improvisation because I think it is free, but in a sense which is somehow related to an order. And it is a contradictory concept of freedom. So most people think improvisation is just doing what you want. I think it is a bit more complex.
It's more like a real dialogue at the end. I mean, you propose a topic, a context. The musician interpret it in a free way, but it has somehow to be in this dialogue. Is that right?
Yeah.
I want to hear...
maybe Biljana is saying something, because she is the person we're talking about here.
Yeah, well, wait, I'll just get a seat. I was most interested so far in the topic of freedom that you mentioned with improvisation, because this is actually a big topic with improvisers in general. And I have to say that we differentiate between improvisation and improvisation. So free improvisation, as free as it gets, is when nothing is said and nothing is reacted to. You just go somewhere with absolutely nothing. So this is not free improvisation at all. Even though I react, however I react in the moment, but it is not, I wouldn't call this free improvisation. And in general, I'm a kind of a improviser that is reacting. So reacting is part of the way that I do it in general. And reacting could be to an audience or to my colleague or to my own impulse or to anything. And at this particular occasion, of course, it's the soundtrack, which is incredibly powerful. So I don't know how would you like me or anybody to just resist it, because it's so powerful. You can hardly, it's really hard to resist it. I manage it to a certain degree, but I just want to join. So.
Yeah, also the improvisational aspect that leads maybe a bit back to what you were asking in the beginning. Not so many people know that East Germany was in one case a very interesting country. It was extremely advanced in free jazz. So there was the biggest open air festival in the world happening in East Germany for free jazz. So that was the only music scene where you could update yourself on the level what really is the state of the art. Maybe in classic a bit, but free jazz was the thing. So, and when I was 13 years old, I went the first time to a free jazz concert, and I didn't know what it is. And that was for me an initiation in a totally different world. And there I learned also how important it is to see the person who is doing something, the physical act of being in the space. That is something very, very interesting. So there are some people who believe that you cannot listen to free jazz which is recorded. Other people just say, no, that is the pure sound, you don't have to be disturbed by the visuals. So it's an interesting discussion, but anyhow. But there's also the question of freedom in it. I mean, it was extremely politicized as something what is extremely free. On the other side, what is coming out of you when you are free? You know? And you would record that and you would analyze it, you would find patterns of behavior what you have no idea of, but they are there. So, and that is, I find this also very interesting, you know, when these things are happening, what you're not aware of.
Proprio questa diciamo libertà di cui parlavate, mi sembra che non solo tu dunque lasci molto spazio all'improvvisazione, al caso, ma mi sembra proprio che nel tuo lavoro cerchi di offrire al pubblico, a chi fruisce delle tue opere, la possibilità di trovare il suo modo di interpretarle, di vederle, di approcciarle. Dunque non solo, per esempio rispetto a questo progetto hai realizzato un lavoro per la radio, poi l'hai aperto alla performance, all'improvvisazione e hai fatto anche un libro che è un'opera a sé relazionata a questo progetto. E lavori spesso in questo modo?
Yeah, I mean, in this special case, the publication, what I made, is essential because it is highlighting some aspect of the question what I have, what is the sense of sound? How you can get information out of sound. Normally publications of the projects I do are an extension of the projects. I hate that you use the book, what you do, as a documentation of the piece, what you have done, because I don't believe in documentation of this way. And I think it is a tradition which artists used a lot, that the book itself is an extension of your own project. So you continue it with different means, different levels. And in this case, it was interesting. I mean, you can get a record of the piece, and it would look like this, which is, by the way, the full title. In the woods, there is a bird, his song stops you and makes you blush. And then, when you are hungry and thirsty, there's someone who drives you away. It's by Arthur Rimbaud from the Illuminations, and one of the first big events with noise. And this book has a kind of visual little leporello where you have a collage, a montage, similar like from these demonstrations, and you have the index of the 60 demonstration where the sound is coming from. So you see it's all over the world. I mean, you read what the demonstration were about. There are left, right, there are young people, there are pensioners who in Japan demonstrating against cutting their pensions. So you have the spectrum of everything. And now the thing is, if you date this or connect this information with this piece, then this piece gets into something what is a documentary. If you don't get this information, then you listen to it like a sound piece like music. And I'm very interested in the differences of the same piece with one information. What creates the information with the sound? When I play you a sound and you cannot identify what it is, and then I tell you what it is, then you say, that's it. And in that moment, your perception of the sound has changed. So the rational thinking is changing the sensuality. And that is something what I'm extremely interested in the terms of art, because we work with that sensuality, with the senses. And it's often said that visual art is not the rational thing, it is but there is the connection for me, which I find so interesting, how knowledge is creating sensuality, and on the other way around, like sensuality is creating knowledge. Not in the sense of a full knowledge, and also never as a sense of a full sensuality, but they are deeply connected. So that's what it is. So, there's a moment where you participate, but then it is starting to be on the edge, and you don't know what is it, where I am. And then you navigate, and then you ask for information to get it. And in the moment when I tell you later that this information was wrong, what I gave you, you're totally gone. Then you don't know what to do anymore. And that is so interesting, what happens with the senses and with the rational thinking when you start to blur the boundaries. So, and especially music. I mean, music is the most abstract and concrete thing at the same time. I mean, singing is a different way of breathing, and the body is an instrument in this case, and you can create things, but what is the sense of it, I mean, there are tons of books about the sense of music, but they are quite helpless for me. And I'm interested in what you can do, But there was a nice phrase by a philosopher, Jean-Luc Nancy. I'm not sure if I quoted correctly. Most people think sense is language minus music. And then he proposed maybe to say that sense is music minus language.
You use sound, music, and publication. Have you ever thought about, today the context, it's very easy to bring you, extending from radio to the internet, for example. Mm-hmm. Have you thought about, connecting this project on a kind of online?
I mean, there is online on the webpage from Documenta where you can listen to it. You can stream it. So, and there's also a download when you buy it. So, yeah. But I could think about it, how you present it in a way. It's open that people also adopt it, that they do something online. I mean, really, but I prefer the physical experience in the space, I must say. I hardly believe that you could create a virtual reality thing with it like it. That could be possible. It's really about sensuality. But in this case, I work with the thing where I am familiar with. There, I would need to work with people who can really give me a 3D. I mean, I saw in Milano at the Fondazione Prada the Inarito 3D installation, and you go in and you have these classes, and then you are in a different setting. I mean, you are witnessing the film. And for me, it's interesting. I found it totally boring. I mean, it was nothing what I was interested in. And then there was a room where you could see the faces of people who were the characters in this movie, immigrants who tried to come from Mexico to the States, and you could read their story. And that was so much more getting me and much more interesting for me than this kind of spectacular thing, that I was quite a bit surprised. And so I think you must test it, and it's a very thin line where it gets a little bit banana.
And how about the setting here? It seems that you worked on this.
Yeah, I mean, I don't want to have a concert situation for this piece because I don't think it worked as a concert. I just wanted also that people can see people listening, because not only focusing on the interpret, on Biljana as a person, that you also see a mass of people, that you also see that you are part of an audience. And this experience that you can do directly what you have in such constellations, that you have this a little bit similar here. And it's also more informal, and it's not such an institutionalized setting. That's what is the idea. If you have it like the chairs and then somebody's in front, I hardly believe that this would work, and I would not like to do it.
Qualcuno ha delle domande?
Simone.
Hi. Going back to the context of the East Germany, there was a certain tradition of artists dealing both with music and visual arts. Is it something you relate to?
Yeah, I mean, to be honest, nobody was thinking of visual art and or music. You just did something, and we were so arrogant that we thought we can do everything. So there was no boundary. You just did what you needed to do. So, and when it was just that you had a tape recorder, what you were experimenting with, or movies, but with a 8mm. So I grew up in a scene of people who every weekend were meeting and talking and showing things what they did, and you try to be better than the best. But of course it was totally sometimes very funny, but it was a very good way of spending time. Thank you very much.